Fallout 4 does have a bit of a reputation for being a little bit unforgiving. Enemies can hit hard, resources feel scarce, and half the time the game just shrugs and goes, figure it out for yourself. But here's the thing, Fallout 4 can actually be way more generous than it lets on. There are a number of systems baked into the game that quietly make combat easier, leveling faster, companions more useful, and survival mode significantly less painful. And the game almost never explains any of them. Now, in a previous video, I covered mechanics that Fallout 4 never really explains to you, the stuff that makes the game feel confusing or unfair. And this time, I'm flipping that around. Today, I'm breaking down hidden systems that actively help you out without exploits, glitches, or breaking the game. And these are just systems that Bethesda expects you to somehow know already. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get stuck into those. Now let's start with something that the game never explains, but sort of expects you to just notice. So if your companion or an NPC at say a settlement defense lands the final blow and kills an enemy, you still get the full XP for that kill, assuming that you've at least landed a hit or two on said enemy. It doesn't matter if you fired the final shot, landed one bullet, and then were busy reloading while screaming internally, that XP is yours. This basically means that companions aren't just moral support or walking dialogue options, they're passive XP generators. Early in the game especially, this can be huge. You can let your companion take point, clear smaller groups, or even accidentally win fights for you while you stand there pretending it was all part of the plan, whilst firing a few shots from behind cover or from a bit of a safe distance. And unlike some of the combat systems we talked about in my previous video, yes, I'm looking at you 95% VATs, this one actually works exactly the way you'd hoped. So if you ever thought, I should be getting XP for that, good news, because you actually are. Fallout just didn't think it was important to tell you itself. So this one explains why some rewards can feel a little bit underwhelming on your first playthrough. So certain quests in Fallout 4 do actually scale with your level at the time you complete them. That means if you rush them early on, you get an early game version of the rewards, but if you wait a bit and level up, the game quietly upgrades the rewards for you. And here's the important part. This isn't min-maxing or exploiting the system. This is Bethesda saying, we'll just adjust it for you, and then not mentioning it again. So you've ever finished a quest, looked at the rewards and thought, wow, that was not worth the emotional journey. And that's probably why. This game rewards patience more than speed, which is ironic considering how often it sends you sprinting across the Commonwealth because fast travel was disabled and you forgot to sleep. The takeaway here is simple. Not every quest needs to be finished immediately. Sometimes waiting actually makes the game easier and better, but again, important to note, this doesn't apply to all quests, just a handful of them. Now let's talk about money, because Fallout 4 is fairly strange about explaining how exactly it works. Vendors don't just run out of caps forever, they restock on a timer along with their inventory, which means if you're trying to sell expensive loot at a vendor and they suddenly look at you and say, sorry dude, I'm broke, that's not the end of the story, and if you come back later, magically, their wallet has recovered. This turns selling loot from a frustrating guessing game into something a little bit more predictable. You don't need exploits, you don't need weird bartering tricks, you just need a bit of patience, and honestly, compared to some of the maths we uncovered in the mechanics video, like damage scaling and diminishing returns, all that stuff, this is one of the few systems of Fallout 4 that actually is quite reasonable, which feels suspicious, but I guess we'll take it. I'm fairly certain this next one, at some point, you've been playing through Fallout 4 and you've hit the same problem as I often have. You're over encumbered, your inventory is a mess, and the game gently suggests you should probably stop picking things up. Fortunately, companions do not live by the same rules, and even though they technically have a carry weight limit, you can keep giving them items using the command system, and they'll just keep taking them. All of them, forever. This effectively turns your companion into a walking storage container with opinions. And early on, especially before you have supply lines or a main settlement set up, this is pretty big. You can loot entire buildings, clear out, dungeons in one trip, and walk away with everything that isn't nailed down to the walls or the floors. The game never tells you this, and it doesn't warn you, it just doesn't even pretend this is intentional. but it works, so do it. Tell your companion to pick that thing up, and they'll just keep doing it forever, without running out of carry weight. And when you put these first few ones together, Fallout 4 companions do kind of start looking a little less optional, because they give you XP for their kills, they carry more stuff than they should be able to, they draw enemy fire, and occasionally they save you from situations you absolutely did not plan for. And yet, a lot of players still treat companions as a roleplay choice rather than a gameplay one, and that's absolutely fine until the game gets a little bit harder. At that point, going solo isn't really more impressive, it's just a little bit more work, and the game clearly balances around the assumption that you're bringing someone with you. So if the last video showed you how combat math sometimes works against you, this is one of the systems that quietly balances things right back in your favour. Fallout just never tells you it's doing that, which seems to be a bit of a common theme. And speaking of the game helping you out quietly, let's talk about combat systems that make fights dramatically easier if you know how to use them. And I'm going to start with Jet, because Jet isn't just a VATS enhancer, because outside of VATS, Jet slows the entire game world down, albeit briefly. So we're talking about enemies, bullets, explosions, everything, all while you continue to move around at a normal speed. And that means you can reload safely, reposition, heal, or just calmly walk away from a fight that absolutely did not go according to plan. When used properly, Jet turns chaotic combat into something a lot more manageable. So if you ever find yourself constantly dying in a boss fight of some sort, next time, stock up on Jet, pop some beforehand, and it should in theory be a lot easier. So basically, if the game feels overwhelming, Jet isn't cheating, it's Fallout 4 saying, here, have a bit of a breather. Power armor is quite an obvious system, but the game doesn't really explain it all that well. A lot of players will treat it like a fragile late game gear and something you need to save for important fights. But even the weakest power armor in the game provides significant damage reduction before normal armor calculations even happen. Like, in simple terms, you take less damage just by being inside the damn thing, which sounds obvious, but it's important to note that if you do end up getting one of the sections damaged, so one of the helmet, the arms, the legs, or the torso, then the wearer, i.e. you, will start taking damage directly. And early on, power armor can be far more useful than it actually looks, but later on, especially on higher difficulties, where enemies hit harder but don't get smarter, power armor is one of the game's built-in ways of balancing out combat when they start to feel like bullet sponges and hit you incredibly hard. And I get this system isn't exactly hidden, it's probably well known, but it's worth including in this video anyway, because when you use power armor correctly and not too often, it effectively makes you king or queen of the Commonwealth battlegrounds. It is a tool, and the game fully expects you to use it, but use it correctly. So let's talk a little bit about stealth. And stealth in Fallout 4 can be more forgiving than it initially seems. Often enemies do stay unaware for longer than you'd actually expect them to, which does mean sneak attack multipliers can trigger even in situations that feel messy or half detected. If you ever landed a sneak attack and thought, there's absolutely no way that should have worked, then congratulations, because it probably did. The game gives you a bit more leeway than the UI actually suggests, which is interesting considering how the UI behaves everywhere else. But this makes stealth builds easier to maintain, and hybrid builds far more viable than most people assume when you want to take a stealthy approach. And finally, for this section, let's talk about legendary weapons, because a lot of the time, Fallout absolutely loves handing you guns that just look bad on paper. Some legendary effects scale independently of weapon damage, so that's the important thing here. I'm talking about effects like wounding or explosive. These don't really care how strong the base weapon is. These effects just work. And this is why low damage weapons can occasionally outperform something that looks objectively better, And the long short of it is, Fallout rewards effects, not just numbers. And that explains a lot of why is this gun melting absolutely everything, and also why the game balance can feel rather unpredictable but not necessarily broken. And once you understand the depth of combat in Fallout 4, the game gets noticeably easier. But if you're playing on survival mode, there are still systems designed specifically to take the edge off a little bit, even if the game never really mentions them. Now, survival mode has a reputation for being punishing, and in other news, water is wet. But one of the easiest ways to make survival dramatically more manageable is something the game barely encourages you to do, and it's something uber simple, and it's just cook your food, guys. Cooked food provides real stat bonuses, heals you, and most importantly, doesn't come with that addiction risk that chems do. So it does make them safer than chems, and once you start cooking regularly, food stops being an emergency heal and starts becoming preparation. Like if you go into fights with extra health ready to go, if you need it, extra strength or extra endurance, and you can get all that without any downsides. It never really frames cooking as a core survival tool, but the moment you treat it like one, survival mode becomes far less stressful. Of course, it's still dangerous, incredibly dangerous, but just a bit less spiteful. Takes the edge off. Now, Fallout often quietly lets you bypass one of the most stressful parts of, I guess, quite a number of role-playing games actually, failing dialogue checks. Charisma checks aren't permanent gatekeepers because with temporary boosts from clothing, chems, or alcohol, you can push your charisma high enough to pass these checks, regardless of your actual build. And this means you don't need to commit to a charisma-heavy character just to avoid missing some content, or making the potentially right decision. You can be a stealth sniper, a power-armored tank, or whatever the hell else you want to be, and you can still talk your way through important moments when it actually matters. The game can be more flexible here than it lets on, which is reassuring, especially after learning how many other systems are quietly judging you behind the scenes. This one at least lets you fight back a bit. And finally, let's talk about the systems that save you the most time in the long run. Settlements. Settlements are a pretty diverse feature in Fallout. Some people love them and go to town on their builds, some people just tolerate them, and some people would rather fight a deathclaw than place another bed in another shack. But regardless of how you feel about settlements, there's one system that quietly makes the entire game smoother, and that is supply lines. Once you connect settlements with supply lines, all the junk you use for crafting is shared automatically between them, so you don't need to move materials manually. You don't need a main base, and you definitely don't need to remember where the hell you left your adhesive. If you've ever fast travelled between settlements just to grab components, the game has been letting you do that the hard way. Setting up supply lines basically turns crafting from a logistics problem into something the game just handles for you, which, considering how many other systems Fallout 4 refuses to explain, feels suspiciously generous. And also a quick disclaimer, you do need to have the first rank of local leader perks to set up supply lines. They aren't just automatically unlocked as a system for you. And speaking of the local leader perk, rank 2 also quietly removes a lot of friction from the game as well, because with it, you can build shops and crafting stations at any of your settlements. So things like weapon benches, armor benches, chemistry benches, armor shops, clinic shops, and everything else. This means you no longer need a home base, you don't need to backtrack, and you certainly don't need to interrupt exploration just to mod a weapon or, well, create some chems. It makes the game stop feeling like a series of errands and starts feeling a little like a continuous story. It's not exactly flashy and it doesn't make combat easier directly, but in terms of time saving and frustration avoided, the local leader perk quietly does a lot more work than a lot of other perks in the game, which makes it one of the perfect examples of Fallout 4's design philosophy. Incredibly useful, but barely explained. And when you put all of these systems together, Fallout 4 starts to feel a lot less hostile and a lot more intentional. Now, although Fallout 4 never really tells you this, it is actually doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to help you out. Your companions quietly carrying half of your inventory, XP coming from places you'd probably never expect, combat systems that reward preparation more than reflexes, None of these are cheating, none of them are accidental, plus Bethesda probably just forgot to explain any of it, or perhaps they intentionally didn't explain it so you could try and figure it out for yourself. And if even one of these systems made your next playthrough a little bit easier, faster, or slightly less rage-inducing, then this video has done its job. And let me know in the comments which one of these systems you had no idea existed, or how it existed properly, or which system you've probably been accidentally fighting against the whole time. And also, more importantly, if there's any you've actually missed off. And if you want more Fallout 4 guides that actually explain what the game is doing, it would be totally awesome if you supported my channel by hitting those like and subscribe buttons and checking out my Fallout 4 playlist. As always, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to catch you in my next one.